complicit in spreading the lie. He is dismissive and uncooperative with respect to considering evidence that P is not true. Now, I want to just throw out a couple of other considerations that I've been wrestling with, and I think others do. There's Hannah Arendt's famous view of the consequences of lying. I quote, "The result of a consistent and total substitution of lies for factual truth is not that the lies will now be accepted as truth and the truth be defamed as lies, but that the sense by which we take our bearings in the real world," and the category of truth versus falsehood is among the mental means to this end, that the sense by which we take our bearings in the real world is being destroyed. Okay? So it's not the lie so much as what lying does to the world we live in. Okay? Then there's Harry Frankfurt's view, philosopher Harry Frankfurt's view, okay, that bullshitters are more dangerous than liars. Okay? In his famous article and then later book, Bullshit. Okay? Now, incredibly prescient, in my view, was Harry Frankfurt, because what he describes as a bullshitter is very much like who is occupying the major seat of power in the United States. Okay, that is somebody who's just says things in a self-centered way. It's about that person, and things are tossed out. Now, you could say we all, to some extent, bullshit, but this is when you've got a premier or a president, then tossing things out that don't seem to make any sense. You're not sure whether or not you should make much of it or not. But for Frankfurt, their bullshitters are more dangerous than liars because the liar wants to move people away from fact and truth, whereas bullshitters have disregard for the truth. So the result is widespread cynicism. So I want to say here that I think there's problems with both Arendt and Frank's views. They're very similar in terms of the consequences that lead to cynicism or a lack of appreciation for the truth. I think at times it depends on the lie that we're talking about. If you've got a very deadly, serious lie that's going to involve killing of people, I think cynicism may be preferable to that lie going out and people acting on it. So just throw that out. Then let me toss a couple of other things that, as I said before, AI so far appears to have algorithms that provide agreeable responses to the questioner, which means that lies and harmful considerations put forth by the user are reinforced. Then there's the question of honest purveyors of hate. Okay? People who are very honest about the fact that they think that people of X shouldn't be given respect. Okay? So I think you've got somebody who says, oh yes, it's true now that it's been revealed that I said 4 years ago that people of a certain color are causing destruction in the world and shouldn't be allowed anywhere near our government. Yes, I did say that 4 years ago, and I still believe it, honestly. Okay, so you can have, in a sense, honest purveyors of outrageous statements, and it gets down to the question of, which Karl Popper dealt with years ago and others, of how much tolerance you give to intolerance. And that at a certain point, you have to become intolerant to the intolerant, as paradoxical as it sounds. So I think, let me leave with this again, perhaps provocative, perhaps for some people, not at all. I think there's a need to challenge and speak out about libelous claims about a group or people rather than avoid doing so or letting things pass. Belief in action consistent with barbarity is not less problematic than cynicism. And the law, I think, in many cases should be changed to permit collective action against collective libel. And I also think I'm going to spend now, I'm going to double check. I think the Welsh Parliament has in fact passed this new law of requiring people to come before a court to deal with allegations or seen to be lies. It seems both the public, the Welsh public, and all the Welsh parties have been in support of this. So that could be, in many respects, a path breaker into altering the laws having to do with lying. With that, thank you very much for putting up with my too long talk.
Thank you.
David. Now we'll go on to our last speaker, Ian.
Can I just interject for a second? We didn't say we were recording, and I just wanted to make sure we are. And
yes, I should on the screen. It says this meeting is being recorded. So.
Yeah, do you have yours on, Ian?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure, so I turned mine on. Anyway, thanks.
Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Philip. Thanks, Greg and David, for your remarks. I learned a lot from them. In terms of one type of egregious lie that always used to occur, we have largely corrected that now. And that was just before an election, federal or provincial, the party in power would always exaggerate the financial health of the federal government or the provincial government. Now we have parliamentary and legislative budget officers that present independent assessments. So I think that's done a lot of good. I'd like to discuss the relation between liars and their audiences in politics. Those who lie in politics are only successful if they have a receptive audience. And research from the University of Alberta indicates that a receptive audience to some kinds of disinformation can be identified as populist. I'll get into that in more detail in a few minutes. So Greg has done a very good job of listing the number of reasons why psychologists have discovered why people lie. To me, the worst type of lie is to exercise power over others by controlling the information that the target has. This is very similar to the totalitarian type of lie that Greg referred to. This can lead to serious harm, from Hitler's propaganda to Trump's disasters and unnecessary political unrest. Lying by controlling information often has its roots in deception. To use deceptive information to control others, the perpetrator is usually convinced that the lies they are using to control others are, in fact, truths. In her analysis of self-deception, psychologist Courtney Warren notes that most of us deceive ourselves in some ways, and becoming more honest is a lifelong journey for those who want to become more self-aware. To the extent that we are not self-aware, we might be labeled as honest liars. From Warren's perspective, the more we learn not to deceive ourselves, the happier we tend to be, and our relations with others tend to be more successful and fulfilling. Those who lie to control others usually believe their lies, and they aren't open to understanding alternative views. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, in the days when I regularly attended the public administration sessions of the Canadian Political Science Association annual meetings. Another regular attendee was Stéphane Dion, who taught public administration at the Université de Montréal. And Stéphane and I got to know each other quite well because every year it seemed we were on the same panel, and we both have adopted children about the same ages. To begin with, Stéphane was neither an independentist nor a federalist, but just a good political scientist whose skills at analyzing public policy options were superb. During the 1995 debates about the Quebec sovereignty referendum, Stéphane told me that he was appalled by the lies told by the pro-sovereignty side about how Quebec would be much better off as an independent state. He appeared in the media as an invited commentator about the pro-sovereignty claims, not because he was a federalist, but because he was a political scientist with the capacity to analyze the veracity of the claims. Misleading pro-sovereignty claims were aimed at populists in Quebec who were susceptible to believing them. Stéphane's analysis became one of the most successful parts of the pro-federalist campaign, not because Stéphane was a federalist, but because he was nonpartisan and dedicated to truth. Partly as a result of Stéphane's media appearances, the yes side narrowly lost. And following the referendum, Stéphane was invited by Prime Minister Chrétien to run for Parliament as a Liberal MP. And in 1996, he was elected and became Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. At Stéphane's urging, the federal government sent a reference question to the Supreme Court of Canada asking whether Quebec could secede unilaterally after a pro-secession vote, either according to the Canadian Constitution or international law, because one of the claims made by the yes side was, of course, with a 50% plus one vote, Quebec can secede either under Canadian law or international law. And of course, the Supreme Court answered no to both questions. However, it also stated that if a secession vote took place and resulted in a substantial majority voting in favor of a clear question about separations, negotiations must take place. Dion shepherded the Clarity Act through Parliament, which gave Parliament the right to define both a clear question and a clear majority. This was enacted in 2000. The pro-independence movement in Alberta has garnered press headlines recently. Like the situation in Quebec in 1995, academic analysis shows that the leaders of the movement are trying to win support, in part through lies and misinformation. The lies and misinformation of Alberta separatist leaders can be countered best through presenting verifiable information, refuting the misinformation. Key is ensuring that the verifiable information is readily available to those who are curious and open to hearing credible analysis. With the decline of traditional media and the rise of social media, making verifiable information readily available is more challenging. The hardcore separatists are not open to considering alternative views, but the just curious people are. There's a project called Common Ground at the University of Alberta, an SSHRC-funded project with principal investigators Jared Wesley, Fyodor Snegovsky, and Michel Maroto. These three have conducted extensive research into the Alberta separatist movement. The research indicates that at least 85% of Albertans currently think that Alberta should stay in Canada and be treated like any other province. However, there is a surge in curiosity about separatism after the 2025 federal election, and now up to half of Albertans are curious about the separatist claims. The research shows that the best indicator of support for separatism is what the researchers call populism. What is populism? Well, according to the Common Ground Project, it frames society as the people versus the elite. Politics is about achieving the public interest, which is treated as obvious and embodied in the leader who claims to represent the real people. The main obstacle is a corrupt establishment blocking common sense solutions. Now, according to the Common Ground quantitative and qualitative research, 4 things stand out as primary indicators of separatist sentiment in Alberta. First, greater susceptibility to conspiratorial thinking. Second, stronger populist beliefs, anti-elite and anti-establishment orientations. Third, heavier daily consumption of far-right news. And fourth, a sense of decline, the feeling that Alberta's and Canada's best days are behind us, and responsiveness to make us great again cues. Some of the claims of the Alberta separatist movement are easily refutable. For example, they claim that the Clarity Act of 2000 means that a majority vote for independence means negotiations would immediately begin. The reality, of course, is that the Clarity Act gives Parliament the right to determine whether there has been a clear majority about a clear question, as well as the Supreme Court decision in 1998 included that the duty to negotiate does not give rise to a duty to agree. Another claim they make is that the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea would give an independent Alberta strong transit rights outside of its borders. The reality is that the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea does not override domestic law. Bilateral agreements are required, and transit states may regulate access for security and economic reasons. The convention does not guarantee frictionless port, rail, or pipeline access. Most Albertans curious about the separatist movement are open to information refuting separatist claims. Most of the minority, who are hardcore populists, are not open to considering alternative viewpoints. And a new threat that I read about a few days ago in the Globe and Mail is called slopaganda. The Canadian Digital Media Research Network is a network of digital media research projects, including those at several universities, whose mission is to understand the dynamics of information production, dissemination, and consumption across digital media. Earlier this week, the network released a report entitled Slopaganda, which claims that a network of inauthentic YouTube accounts with nearly 40 million views is targeting Alberta audiences, exploiting genuinely held grievances, and repurposing them to advance a narrative that normalizes the prospect of secession and U.S. annexation. These YouTube accounts perform an Albertan perspective, but we find that as the network finds no evidence to suggest that any of them were created in Alberta. The AI avatars and paid American voice actors featured in these videos frequently mispronounce, miscontextualize, and misunderstand the politics that they cover. These videos contain frequent and obvious lies, drawing on real news stories to reach exaggerated conclusions designed to exploit political divisions. So the inauthentic YouTube accounts use AI-generated deepfakes of politicians, often Premier Smith and Prime Minister Carney, with maps in the background showing some combination of Western provinces as part of the US. The network's research indicates that the inauthentic YouTube accounts are well-funded and likely generated by a group of several people, The network hasn't been able to identify the country of origin as of yet. The network recommends that YouTube take actions such as disclosing the ownership and history of the inauthentic channels and allowing viewers to flag misleading content. So, meeting the challenge of lying. I agree with the potential solutions presented both by Greg and David. In 1991, the Royal Commission on Electoral Reform and Party Finances recommended that political parties develop their own codes of conduct that, among other things, would prohibit knowingly lying by key party members. A few parties in Canada have developed codes of conduct, including Alberta's United Conservative Party. Their code states that key members of the party must, I quote, speak and act honestly in good faith and with the best interests of the United Conservative Party and the people of Alberta foremost in mind. Complaints about breaches of the code are heard and determined by the executive director of the party rather than by someone who is independent of the party. So although there's a code there, it's not enforceable by an independent person. We need to ensure that lies are called out for what they are. Embarrassment is often an effective form of punishment, but only if enough citizens are willing to take the risks of confronting the liars. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Ian, for that presentation.
You're welcome.
Now we'll open our floor to questions. Does anybody have a question?
I've put my hand up.
Okay, Bob, go ahead.
Question. You say that I came on this panel in part because I knew my colleague David Shugarman was going to be present. I haven't seen David for a while. He's a long way away and across the country, so I really joined just to see him in most part, see the rest of you more frequently. But I have to take issue with one of the things he was talking about. I think, David, you observed that in some circumstances, cynicism might be a preferable alternative. And I think what you're really looking for is not cynicism, but skepticism. You want people to be, on the whole, challenging what they see as potentially untrue, rather than to presume that everything they hear is untrue. And so I think you don't want a cynic, you want a skeptic. I have to say a lot of the discussion has revolved around whether or not what kinds of sanctions can be provided against lying when it occurs. I think there was a general sense that lying has detrimental impact, even if it's not particularly intended. And misinformation is misinformation. But there seemed to be some attention to what we in the criminal code we call mens rea. I mean, do we really care whether people believe the lies they're telling, or is it simply important enough that the misinformation be corrected, that we find some means of doing so, whatever sanctions might be provided against their behavior? I'm concerned about the whole question of self-deception. I think that we see a lot of lies where it appears that the person in question may actually believe what they're saying. The misinformation, and maybe it's not really lying in that case, but it is misinformation that is as dangerous as if it were intended. And then I guess a question I raise is whether there are degrees of misinformation that we should be concerned about. I mean, it didn't seem to me, I guess, and maybe not to most of us, particularly problematic that Donald Trump lied about the size of the crowd at his inauguration. But it was the first signal that he was going to lie about everything, I think. And so some of his lies are of much more consequence. And so the question, I guess, is whether in being intolerant of those lies, we have to single out or separate out the things that are of greater consequence to be addressed and let some of the lesser things go.
Did you
I guess I was inviting questions and comments from the speakers, but
responses?
Do I get a chance to respond to my friend?
Go ahead, David. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, of course, I agree with you that skepticism is a crucial thing in terms of dealing with politics, dealing with so much else. And it's too bad that we don't teach people from the age of 5 to the age of 95 um, more about the rewards and the importance of being skeptical. But that when I said that I would take what Arendt and Harry Frankfurt said about cynicism being worse than lying, I was not, not for a second denying the importance of skepticism, saying that was Arendt's and Frankfurt's view that cynicism was worse than lying. And I respond by that saying, on the grounds that they're giving, I would say it depends on the nature of the lie, just as you just gave us an example of how, what kind of lie we just say, oh, ridiculous, or let's not worry about it, and much more important lies. So I just want to get clear on that. I'm not inviting cynicism, that's for sure.
Okay.
But and and then secondly, I guess when we talk about, since we don't, many of us don't even want to talk about the guy with the orange hair. We try to talk about other things, but um, since you mentioned that, Bob, I think that there is an environment that is very, very popular. Let's call it a business environment where bluffing and bullshitting are accepted as transactional parts of transactional life. And in many cases, uh, people in that environment and who are used to that kind of thing think that it's a very clever thing to be a good bullshitter or a good bluffer. Okay. So, and they'd say, oh no, we're not lying. We're just we're just making up things to bluff people, and we're successful. Winners are successful. Okay. And I think that that is, in fact, that explains, to, at least for me, one of the reasons why people like Donald Trump are successful and why people who follow him or have a lot of respect for him and admiration do believe that there are winners and there are losers, and the winners know how to make deals and to bluff people. And that, I think that complicates the whole thing about lying in this case, because there's a lot of acceptability to that kind of life and that those kinds of actions in that life.
I come to something that Ian said though, which is about the importance of the audience for the lying. I think you're right that there are people in a large segment of Trump supporters who simply say, "Yeah, he lies, but it's to bluff people, and it's for our good." There are others though who I think simply believe that what they're hearing is true rather than a bluff, and that I think is problematic in the long run as well. And I'm not sure what you do about that other than try to refute the lies. But if he's believed and we're not, then
Can I just say something about the crowd size lie?
yeah,
Because I think that's, well, it's don't believe your lying eyes. That's one thing, but the other is it's part of what we see as a series of constant behavioral lying. That's a mode of operating, and it is creating a climate to get people to agree. The guy who walked out, I can't remember his name now, the press secretary walked out and said all those lies about Trump's crowd being better. That fellow should have stopped right there. Just said, I'm not doing that. But it's about power. It's about making people do your will. He had a job, he just went out and did it. And that creates a climate for everybody else. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that.
Greg and David, what is the difference between misinformation and disinformation? I think both of you are making a distinction. And which is the more dangerous?
Well, that's in a sense hard to assess. But disinformation, if you is deliberately spreading, is deliberately deceptive and spreading lies or misinformation. Misinformation is when you say something incorrect and your understanding may be you haven't got all the facts or whatever, and you talk about that. But you're not lying. You're not intending to spread a lie. Whereas disinformation is clearly intended to deceive. One of the conflations of it, though, is what if you're the listener to the disinformation and you think, oh, okay, that's right,
Yeah.
and then you start saying it,
Yeah.
then it's misinformation, right? So there's kind of a conflation, but the origin of disinformation is intentionally deceptive.
So in David's language, you can say a lie without being a liar.
That's correct. Well, that's you can be spreading misinformation, but it was initially disinformation. Okay? Somebody went out of their way to lie about things and spread falsehoods. But then there are people for one thing, that Greg has just responded to that, and that Ian talked about people of populists who accept that and then continue to talk about it, but they don't think they're lying. Okay, but the misinformation continues.
But you would agree probably that in popular parlance, the two are synonyms.
Say that again.
You would agree probably that in popular parlance, misinformation and disinformation are synonymous.
I know. I think
No?
that people who think about it would say they're not synonymous. One
Yeah,
is
but I'm not talking
it's
about
the
people who
difference
think about it. I'm
between
talking about
I'm not
popular
talking about people who
parlance.
think
Oh.
about it, I'm talking about popular parlance.
Yeah,
yeah, that may be that may
right.
be. I mean,
I think so.
yeah,
Because I'm confused myself about misinformation and disinformation and the difference between them. I thought going into this that misinformation was more heinous than disinformation, but you're telling me otherwise.
well, I think they both can be
Maybe,
pretty
right?
pretty disastrous. They can both, but
Yes.
it's like what you just said. You can, and I mentioned it in my speaking notes, and that is, one can be spreading lies that one believes are not lies.
Yeah.
Okay. But where did the lie start? How did it get going? Okay. And there was a liar. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, but there is a difference between being misinformed and intentionally lying. I mean,
Yeah.
for generations, people believed the world was flat,
Yeah.
but that they weren't lying. They looked over the horizon and it looked pretty flat.
Yeah, right.
Uh, but it's wrong.
Yeah.
Um, and and people would say to each other, "Oh yeah, another flat day here on Earth." But that's they're not spreading deception in the same way.
Right.
Their understanding of the environment is limited. And I do think it's different. When you said what's the most harmful, though, is ignorance more harmful than lying? I don't know, because it's going to depend on what it is.
Mhm.
Ignorance of the environment and its consequences may be far more profound in affecting our lives than a series of lies. I'm not sure how to assess the question you asked.
Any other questions? Ian, why did you choose to address populists as your preferred audience. Another way of asking the same question would be, might other audiences of different descriptions equally qualify?
Well, as most of you know I did my undergrad at the University of Alberta, and I have maintained ties with people at the University of Alberta. So about a month ago, I had lunch here in Toronto with Jared Wesley, who's part of this research project that I was telling you about. And it was that group has done extensive research. I find it quite fascinating. And so it was as a result of their research, the surveys that they've done, and many in-person interviews, that they found that what they called populists uh, were the most susceptible to uh, arguments about Alberta separation.
Yeah, it works well in that case. But it's an era in which populists, we live in an era in which populists are both admired and reviled. And I don't think they're the only audience in question here. I mean, it would make equal sense to me to designate an audience, say, of leftists as um, equally identifiable as a target audience with populists. But that's perhaps not
Yeah. It's just that what they found in their research, the best predictor of support for independence in Alberta was being what they defined as a populist. And their definition of populism that I gave you wouldn't be the same definition that other people might give a populism.
Yeah, as I say, in the case of Alberta, it works well because that's the audience we're talking about, to which the separatist message would primarily appeal.
If you take the kind of principal characteristic of populism, and as Ian says, he's given one definition, I kind of like it, so I'm going to stick with it, is that you believe that in general, the people, sort of undifferentiated mass of people, have a better sense of the world than elites, and have a better and are more likely to be right about things, and more likely to be looking after your interests than elites. Then that makes you susceptible, it seems to me, to a series of manipulative lies, like misinformation, because you're in effect predisposed to believe that the people who are in positions of authority are telling you things that are untrue.
Yeah.
You may have come to that by experience, but you may have come to it by some other means. And if that's your preferred position, then it seems to me you're going to be more susceptible to believing the lies.
Bob, if I may interject, doesn't doesn't is it shouldn't we be problematizing truth a little bit here?
Yes.
I mean, the whole discussion seems to take the truth to be something that is easily discerned, readily agreed upon, and the lie is the departure from that truth. But in fact, isn't truth itself, you have to put it together. You have to have criteria. You have to be able to construct a truth in a way that is reasonable and persuasive. You just criticized or agreed with Ian and with the study that Ian cited regarding the biases of populism. But isn't it also possible to conceive of populism in a more generous spirit and say, actually, the common sense of ordinary people through their everyday experience is closer to being right than it is being wrong? Because the great majority of people are exploited by elites. They are misled by elites. They are lied to by elites. And this does not make them more gullible. It actually makes them reasonably skeptical. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that I agree with that position, but I don't think we can dismiss it out of hand. We have to look at How do we come to an understanding of the truth? And how does that affect our understanding of a lie?
I,
Because they can't be seen as just, well, the truth is obvious, and then the lie becomes obvious. It ain't always so. And if you want an example of how it's not always so, take this proposition. Israel committed genocide in Gaza. Is that a lie or the truth? Or is it somewhere in between?
I knew that when I saw your name on the screen, Stephen, at some point you would make a smart and very sensible contrarian viewpoint. And I think you've cut us in a real problem. I think we started off with the presumption that there are truths and therefore untruths, and untruths may be sometimes lies and sometimes just misinformation. But it doesn't presume that the truth is obvious. I guess the problem is the difference between contested viewpoints, contested truths, and what Ms. Conway referred to as alternative facts.
Right.
I think there are things that we know to be certain, and there are things we contest as uncertain. And I don't think we may not all agree on what falls in which category, but it does seem to me you point out a very important distinction and an important concern, which is as we try to argue with people about what we believe to be untrue, we better be careful to be skeptical, or at least concerned with the rightness of our own truths, our own position, and whether we can sustain them. So yeah, I'm humbled by your intervention.
Can I
Any
just
other
say, oh, sorry.
observations?
Sorry.
Did you want to follow up on that, Stephen?
No, I just wanted to throw that out and see how people reacted.
Well, here's another one I've got for you. What's the relationship between misinformation, disinformation, lying, and ideology? We live in a world of ideology, and it's very difficult to escape it. The ideologist, among other things, is one who believes what that person says is true, even though it may be false, but that person often doesn't know it's false. Now, is that person spreading misinformation? I guess so, because by definition, the person is not intentionally spreading things which that person knows to be false. Actually, the person in question believes them to be true. Or is the person engaged in disinformation, that is, clandestinely proclaiming things that that person knows to be untrue as truths? And we have a lot of that going on. I mean, academia is rife with ideology. Every ism, or practically every ism in English, is an ideology, including conservatism and liberalism and so on and so forth. And what is ideology? Well, I tell my students it's a word that's come under severe stress since about 1859, when it fell into the hands of Marx and Engels and German ideology, and got a bad reputation since that time. So there's nothing wrong with ideology as a word. It just means the study of ideas. A very venerable profession, I would say. But now, well, since 1859, it's come to mean something hypothetical. So you advance points of view which simply express the interests of your own socioeconomic class. And usually we don't do that knowingly. One wonders how Marx and Engels themselves escaped their verdict about ideology. But given the ubiquity of ideology, how can we struggle with this problem of misinformation, disinformation, and lying in a world of ideology? Because that's my question.
Well, I want to pick up on a couple of things, and to go back to something that Steve Newman said earlier. I don't think to me, there's no question at all about what I regard as a fact of life, and that is that on some issues, we don't know what the truth is. And there's a big difference between a big T truth and small t truths that can undergo continual questioning and investigation. But until in the world of science or health, we all are old enough to know that what was once believed to be the case, as in, this cigarette that this doctor recommends as good for you, that goes through changes as we learn more and as people in various professional fields come to study and then produce what is regarded for a time as strong evidence, which can then be refuted down the way. I don't think there's any question about that. And so on some things, we're not, and with respect to certain political preferences, people are entitled to disagree. I think that's one of the things about democracy, that we can disagree and we may not all come to the agreement on what is the true path to follow or the true policy. And I think Steve Newman and Bob Drummond's exchange also remind us that the elites, and this is not to take issue with Ian, but the elites, okay, in Germany in the 30s and into the early 40s, and elites around the world today, that is to say, let's call them elites who have an education at the equivalent of Ivy League schools or Cambridge or Oxford, okay, have to me, outrageously right-wing views, even though they're well educated. And I mean, the American Senate is full of people with law degrees from terrific universities, and they've raised their hand every time Trump wants them to raise their hand. So I don't think that it's right to just focus on populists as being either susceptible or responsible for these outrageous views. Outrageous views also come from people who've got science degrees and law degrees, and I think that's problematic. There's no question. And who's got the answer to how this person who's taken a course from the top constitutional expert in the United States says outrageous things, and this professor who gave this person an A says he can't believe what the person is saying today. That happens, but I wouldn't, but we're talking about people highly educated and we could say thoughtful, and in this case, thoughtful. Let me just throw out the person who is known as the philosopher raising questions about what it means to think. And for a while, the most influential professor of philosophy probably in Europe, and that's Heidegger, Martin Heidegger, okay, who Arendt studied with and slept with, okay,
Yeah.
and there's Heidegger proclaiming himself a Nazi, okay, so these are problems that we see all around us.
Well, we have the more recent example of Alan Dershowitz renouncing his some 67-year affiliation with the Democratic Party and joining the
Yeah.
Republicans.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't think he's renounced ideology. I think he's gone from one camp to the other, and I admire him in many ways. But one kind of shakes one's head. What hope is there for the rest of us if that can happen to a person of his stature?
Can I just say a couple of things? One, I think the example of populist versus elite was an example. I don't think he intended it to mean a definitive answer about all elites and all populists. So, I think we ought to maybe acknowledge that. Another, just a comment on elites. I mean, I supposedly am a member of the elite. I'm a fellow of your college, McLaughlin College. I've also been a fellow at Oxford. I have all kinds of training, and I have absolutely no power, so I don't know who thinks I can influence very much. But uh, the other thing was about truth. I take the comment, and I thought actually a fair bit about this. If you look at Arendt's view of that, is there are different forms of truth, right? Religious truth, rational truth, and factual truth. And what the focus becomes on is what factual truth is. Now, it is the case that you can debate over what the facts are and how you apprehend the facts and so on. But I'd say in response, I think partly to the ideology argument, yes, it's true that we perceive things through lenses, but it's also, I think, the truth that there is a world outside us. Things do exist. Now, how we may come to characterize them is important, but they do exist, and there can be rational and reasonable debate about them, but they do exist. And I think that the truth that we're contrasting lies with is that existence of something. It can be acknowledged, socially acknowledged, or proven scientifically. I think that's sort of where we're at. I realize that's not all that satisfactory, but I think that's how I'd come at it. Anyway.
Okay, we've been going at this for a long time, so it's about time we wrap up. Are there any final questions before we do so? Okay, not seeing any. I want to thank our speakers, Greg and David and Ian, for excellent presentations on a very provocative topic. I don't know if we've redressed the situation, but at least we understand it better. And that's a large part in the learning process. So thank you again for coming and supporting the panel and the work of the York Collegium for Public Ethics. I don't know when our next presentation is going to be, but we'll let you know. And we look forward to seeing you at the next presentation.
Thank you, Phil, for organizing.
Have a wonderful day.
Thanks to all.
We hope to see you again soon.
Thanks.
Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.